have one announcement I'd like to make. Our Cranbrook Business and Market Payments reminds me that even though it's not on the calendar yet, this year Astronomy Day will be May 14th, and we will be having an event here at Cranbrook as usual. So bring your solar telescope and your sense of fun to Cranbrook May 14th for Astronomy Day. And Bob Tremblay will be telling you more about that in the future.
Go for it. Okay.
It's going.
All right, tonight's long presentation is going to be from a longtime member. Doug Bock has been a lifetime member of the WAS since 1973. He's got a long list of things you may have read online. He's been a past president, past first vice president, past editor of the WASP. He's a past Deep Sky subgroup chairman. He received the E. John Searles Award in 1980 and 1982. He's a member of the 7 Pounds Astronomy Club and has had past memberships in Romeo Astronomy Club, the MSU Astronomy Club, the LowBrow Astronomy Club, the EMU Astronomy Club. More?
GLAAC?
Oh yeah, I'll get to that. He's one of the founders of GLAAC. That's the Great Lakes Amateur Astronomy Club. He's the director. He operates the Northern Cross Observatory and the Boon Hill Observatory. He's a past chairman and vice chairman of the Great Lakes region of the Astronomical League, and by default on the board there. He's hosted 30 years of star parties at Boon Hill and 20 years at the Northern Cross Observatory. Tonight he's going to give a lecture on time-lapse, I believe astrophotography primarily, I hope.
Time-lapse, yeah.
Time-lapse photography, and take it away, Doug.
Well, thank you for that introduction. Do you have time for your channel? I'd like to officially open the first and probably only session of the AAA, the Amateur Astronomer Anonymous Community. Hello, I'm Doug Bock. I'm an amateur astronomer.
Hi, Doug! Hi, Doug! Hi,
Doug! There's still time, Doug.
No, it's not.
I found my addiction in 1965 when, at the age of 9 years old, my neighbor had a 3-inch f10 telescope. And he was kind enough to show me M13 and Saturn. And I've been an addict ever since. So, with that said, my current addiction related to amateur astronomy for the last 18 months has been time-lapse photography. And that's what tonight's talk is about. So what we're going to go over tonight is what is time-lapse photography, the equipment I use, the data collection methods I have, some of the pre-processing I do for raw data that I collect, how to render the video, and then publishing as a complete product for your enjoyment. And then we'll have the example video that I brought along, some work I've done the last year, and then the Q&A session. So what is it? Well, it's not regular video where you record like being recorded right now, but it is a method of taking images over time that are separated by large amounts of time in between each frame, and then putting them together into a video that runs fairly fast. It shows quick motion of events that are pretty slow initially. So the equipment I use is a Canon T3i. I have, which is a kind of a medium range camera, not too expensive, but it's not the pro ones like you can get for several $1,000s. I have a default 18mm to 55mm telephoto and a 75 to 300mm telephoto. And these are pretty run-of-the-mill type lenses, so they have, you know, what you would consider typical average quality, I would say. A tripod, a remote timer. Here in Michigan, you definitely need to put a doohickey on that lens, especially if you're going to run all night long. And then I have an AC/DC power source, or you can use the internal batteries of the camera. And the reason I have an AC power source is over a full night, I end up having to pop in 2 or 3 internal batteries, and so I went and got a power unit. Optionally, you can use a tracking system. I happen to have a SkyTracker drive system that I also use for some interesting effects relative to time lapse. But that SkyTracker also allows you to do non-guided but tracked images with some of these lenses that I have, which I'll have some examples of that as well. So here's the camera. Okay, sorry about that. All right, so this is the Canon T3i I have with the 18 to 55 millimeter zoom. So that's my primary instrument for data collection. This is a remote timer which you can get for any digital SLR. This one is allows you to set the exposure time you want for the camera, the delay between the exposures, and you can actually set how many you want to take, or you can set it to infinity, basically. It just continuously take exposures. This is the AC power unit. If you notice on the right-hand side, a little black unit, which happens to look just like the battery that would go into the camera. So it replaces it, and the cord hangs off of the camera for the purposes of powering it. This is a standard setup that I use. I have a battery pack sitting there to drive the heaters, and then I have the AC unit plugged into the power of the observatory, so that I have power all night. If you want to sit and observe, you can sit in the chair, and of course you have to have a coffee. Stay awake.
Oh, sure, it's coffee.
It's whatever you want it to be. I'm not here to judge. This is the SkyTracker unit that I use, and it is it runs basically sidereal array, and the ball mount goes onto the tracking device. The polar alignment scope on the right there is used to align it to the North Celestial Pole for the night if you want to do full tracking like any other tracking system. And of course the camera will go on that ball mount. On a ball mount allows you to turn and put the camera in any position you want, fix it in, and start your exposures. So that's an option you have as well. So during the data collection process, this is an interesting part of the challenge during the 18 months that I've been doing this, and that is what exposure should I use, what ISO rating should I use to get a reasonable data collection of the night sky. If you run at ISO 800, you can get the least amount of noise, but you have to expose for longer to get the same depth of field as far as magnitudes in the sky itself. Typically, I run around 6400, so I can run 15 seconds when I'm not guiding. And so I'll run either 10 to 15 seconds on each exposure. Most of the time, I will use the 18mm f3.5 setting on the wide field telephoto. However, I have done some work with this, and I actually have some pictures I'll show you later. At 75mm, 140mm, and 210, and then 300mm. Obviously, when I get up to those focal lengths, I have to put the tracker on in order to keep the image in the field of view correctly. So, set the timer up to take 15-second shots with a 5 to 10 second delay in between. And for me, now that I got the power all set up, I can run it all night and go to bed. Or, in the case of when I'm up at Boon Hill, I set this up in the evening during dusk. And once it gets dark enough, I start it up and I go over to the 18-inch and do my observing for the night with the 18-inch. And if my buddy Rich Brenz is there, he pulls the 25-inch out of the Boon Hill clubhouse, and we also use that, so that's kind of fun. So I like to be able to set something up that's automated to do this. and let it just run, and that's what I've accomplished so far. I've been able to do that, and it makes it so I can do other things as well. But that's only the beginning of the story, the data collection. So here's how I set up the camera. This is the back display screen of the camera. Set it to manual bulb. I have it at f3.5 at this point with the 18mm. I set the ISO to 6400, and I collect the data in RAW format. And as you notice, it says in RAW format I can take 4,100 images. Now, you might ask, how can you take that many images? Well, actually, if I ran it in JPEG, I could take 20,000 images or more. But I'm running it RAW, and each RAW file on this camera is between 32 and 35 megabytes per frame. So I have a 128 gigabyte SD card sitting in this camera so that I can run it all night. And to give you an idea of how many you might take in a night, if you take 15-second exposures with a 5-second delay, you get 3 frames per minute. That's 180 frames per hour. And in a 10-hour period, if you have the dark sky for 10 hours, that's 1,800 images. That's a lot of data. So the data collection options you have, or at least I have at this moment, is I can run a static series on a tripod, which means that the background sky moves, as you would expect, with the foreground, if you have foreground in your field of view, would be static, which is nice because you can watch the rotation or as things rise and things like that. Or you can run a semi-tracking series, which in the sky tracker I have has a half sidereal rate, which allows me to click it on, and it will still capture the sky moving at half the speed that it would be if it was static, but the foreground moves as well, which is an interesting effect, and I've got some examples of that as well. Or you can run a full tracking series, which means you turn the full sidereal rate on to the sky tracker, and the sky will stay still, but the ground will move underneath if you have foreground. And then I have an example of that as well. So for processing, tools that you have to have, after you collect all this data, so let's say I run a night, I've got 1,800 images. I have to be able to download this to a computer because all the processing is done on a computer. I use Adobe Bridge, which is a product from Adobe, obviously. Adobe After Effects, and also a tool called Vegas Movie Studio. I have version 11. And then you can even do some rudimentary processing in YouTube once you've uploaded it there. So here's my processing computer. This computer, by the way, that's a 37-inch monitor. This computer has 40 gigabytes of memory on it, and it's capable of 64 gigabytes. It's a quad-core processor, i7. And the reason I have 40 gigabytes of memory on it, when I first started this 18 months ago, it only had 8. And when I tried to render these huge files, it didn't like to run very well. So I ordered another 32 gigabytes, put it in there, and now I can run my rendering sequences pretty well. It uses up about 32 to 36 gig of the total memory in the computer, and I can render a 10-hour time lapse, and it takes about 2 hours for this computer to do that. So you've collected your images, and now you've got all these images. In this particular case, I've got a demo version of 400 images off of one of my sequences I'm going to use as an example. I'm not doing a live demonstration of software. I'm only going to point out the things that I go through with some screenshots. So here's my raw images. As you can see, they're, they've got kind of a high sky background. This is the Milky Way off to the west, up at Boon Hill. So in Adobe Bridge, I use that to do my pre-processing. And the only reason I use it allows me to pull up, several hundred images at once, or if it's a full night, 1,800 images at once. And I could select a master image and then apply any changes to that single image that I want to make for image processing, enhancements, etc., to all of them, so that you have a consistent process for every one of those frames that you've collected. So this is Adobe Bridge. And I'm in the folder where all these images are sitting. And I'm going to open them up, select them all, and open them up using this software. And I'm going to open them in RAW format, because I collect the data in camera RAW. I don't collect them in JPEG. I collect them in camera RAW. And you want to collect these images in camera RAW because you don't want the camera to do much of any pre-processing it, for the first reason. The second reason is these applications will allow you to do more processing in the RAW format than they would if they were in JPEG. And so everything's been captured in RAW and not in JPEG. This camera happens to be capable of collecting both RAW and JPEG at the same time, or one or the other if you want, so you just make those settings. So I'm going to open them up in RAW. And when I open them up in RAW, it brings up a subfolder or subwindow that basically allows you to do some processing. And one of the things I want to point out here is there are various options here in this little list. You can do a curve manipulation, or you could do things with these various bars that allow you to change the white balance, which they call temperature. Excuse me. The tint, the exposure time, you can actually increase the exposure of the frame, it makes it brighter. Do highlights, you can increase the contrast, you can change the shades, the whites, the blacks, clarity, vibrance, etc. But you can also do these other little tabs to do other things with them. So here's an example of the raw data before I do any processing on it. And what I'm going to do, show you, is that I'm going to apply a temperature shift from 5200 to 4000. I'm going to change the exposure a little bit, some of the contrast, the shadows, whites, and blacks. I'm not going to do much with the clarity. And this is what it ends up doing right now. So I'm going to pop back and forth so you can see the difference. Same image. Okay?
That's impressive. That's impressive.
And this is just playing with it. You could do many things with this, but this was kind of when I was setting up this presentation, I kind of played with it at that time. And the point being is the data is there. Once you've collected it, it's there. You can bring it out, you can increase the dynamic range. You can do all kinds of cool things with software that makes the images pop. And that's exactly what this part of it is. Okay? Now, as I'm doing that, making all these changes, this left-hand side shows the changes of all the images that are happening in real time while I'm doing it. So I can see, because I thought I'd select all at the top here, there's a select all button at the top. I selected that before I started my processing. And it will change every one of those according to this master that I'm working on. It applies it to all those hundreds of thousands of images. Now, can you imagine taking 1,000 images and manually doing each one of those? So this tool is very useful for that. Okay. So Adobe After Effects is what I use to take all those raw images that I just processed. And by the way, the raw images are not themselves changed. What this software does is it creates a second file with all the configuration changes of the that you've applied in this tool. And that is, they call it an AEP file, which is After Effects Processing. So you have your raw data that never gets touched, but it is generated for every one of these files this configuration file that tells other software how to modify the CR2 file according to what you've asked for. So it doesn't actually destroy the data. So the next thing I do is, using Adobe After Effects, is I'll import the raw process files as a raw sequence. And then I'll set up the output to an API, which is the first level of rendering I do. I do render it at about a quarter of the size of the originals. The originals are about 5200 by 3600. Big files. It's an 18 megapixel camera, so it takes big files. But since I know my target is to get to something I'm going to render on YouTube, but I want to be able to render it larger than that initially. I know that I'm going to end up at a 1080p MP4. And so I'm not worried too much about taking out some of the data out of the originals, because I know where my target's going to be. Now what I could do is I could render this API in full size, but I don't have a monitor that'll display it there. Okay? Until I get a 4K monitor, I wouldn't be able to render it at all and have actually the entire glory, if you will, of the original images. And since most people have lower resolution 1080p, or they may have at most maybe 2500 by 1600 monitors, this 2500 by 1800 would work fine on most monitors if you rendered it on something that large. So I render it at this resolution. And to do that, you open up After Effects, and the sequences that you've already worked on, you go to that folder, and you select all of them, and at the bottom here, you checkbox that says Camera Raw Sequence. What that does is it pulls it in as a single object, all 1800 images, as a single object that you can work on as an object. So we pull those up, and once the application has pulled that sequence in, it's sitting here as the images that you pulled in. You can do some preliminary things on it as well in this application, but I don't do a whole lot with this at this time, at least, but render it. So I'll pull it down into the rendering queue down here. I'll rename it to whatever file I want. And then this is where I also change it from the full resolution I talked about to that 2500 or 2600 by 15 or 1600. And then I tell it to render. And like I said, this demo one would have taken about 20 minutes to render. That's why I'm not doing it here. But 1800 images have taken me as long as 2 hours to render. So I start my computer up at night and just let it render while I'm sleeping. Once it's done, I've rendered, this is the first render. Once that's done, I can now take that AVI file and I can import it into a tool I've got called Vegas Studio. This tool, which I'm going to go through a little bit, allows me to pull in the original AVI or any other sets of media that I would want to also render. And that can be music, MP4s, any other types of media you want, digital stills, whatever. And if you want to then use it to align the segments, obviously if I had this one segment from July, and I have another segment from June, and I have another segment from October, and I want to take kind of out of the 27 segments I've taken in the year, I want to put together maybe 8. Well, I have to be able to thread them together, right? So that's what I use this tool to do, is put those together. It also allows you to do fade options, where you can fade from one segment to the other. You can make that fade as long or as short as you want. You can put up text for call-outs, declaring things, whatever you like. You can actually do voiceover on top of the music if you want to, with your headset mic on the computer. You can put narration in and describe what you're looking at and things like that. You can also take the media and extend it in time, which means if the sequence is 30 seconds. You can stretch it to 45. The frame rate goes down on it, and if you do it too much, your time lapse becomes pretty jerky. So you want to keep it 24 frames per second or faster for your final rendering. In the video I'm going to show you, I did not change any of that. I did not stretch or compress any of the video that I'm going to show you tonight. In 2014, when I did this, I did a lot of stretching. A lot of my videos were a little bit jumpy. Because in 2014, I didn't have a full battery source, a full power source for the night. And a lot of my sequences were only 2 hours or more. And that doesn't work out to many frames. And then finally, you're going to render it to MP4 format at 1080p, so you can publish it on your YouTube channel for all to see. So here's an example of HD Vegas in final production of this time lapse you're going to see. And if you notice here, we have let's see if we get the cursor to work. There we go. I have a lot of different media in here. I have a couple of music pieces. I have some different segments that I've taken over the year. And I'm going to thread them all together down here, as such. And I'm going to put in some text at the beginning and some text at the end. That's what these little text boxes are. And then I'm going to drop some music in place. And that's what this is. You can drop other media in here. Like I said, you can add another audio track to do voiceover. You can take these on this screen. You can scroll in so you can look at individual frames of the video you're working on. You can splice frames out. You just mark them and then take them out. And then you can slide the other videos up to the previous one. So you can do a lot of editing of frames you don't want or segments you don't want. You can overlay them so there's simultaneous video going on. A lot of cool things you can do with this for final publication. But as you can see, there's lots of different pieces of data that I've collected over the year. And that's why I went through the data collection process. This video that you're going to see tonight is 9,000 frames. That means a lot of time it's taken to collect it all. Approximately 40 hours of data collection, 45 hours of data collection. And then once you get it up to where you want it, you render now another file called the MP4 file. You can upload it to YouTube. And YouTube, during the upload process, will allow you to add other music if you want, which actually replaces the music you have. Or you can do some preliminary, very basic processing, which I don't use. I merely just upload it to my YouTube channel. And that's my YouTube channel, and there's a version of what you're going to see tonight on my YouTube channel there at the first one right there, this one here. And for those that have never been to my YouTube channel, I've got YouTube videos of setting up the 14-inch up at GLAAC West Series, the CW Series Observatory at Bill's star parties. I've got examples of people doing other things, like here's one of Tony Licata doing a collimation check on Mike's SCT. And I had some videos of setting up the 14-inch in the observatory in my backyard. But there's a whole bunch of other time-lapse videos in the astronomy folder that you can look at, little segments that I've done that I've published. Now, the interesting thing about taking thousands of images with lots of data, a couple of things interesting about it. How do I look through 9,000 images? Well, you end up not doing that very often because that's very time consuming. But because you've taken all these images over time, there's opportunities to do other digital processing to create photos that are enhanced because of the data you collected. And there are also opportunities to discover things. that you didn't see because you were off looking through your 18-inch and not paying attention to what was going on over the big part of the sky. And time-lapse is also very good for capturing aurora over a night, which I've got some segments in here that have a little bit of aurora both at Boon Hill, which is, again, west of GLAAC, and also in my backyard at Northern Cross. You can catch meteors, satellites, and in one segment, there's actually, in a lot of the segments, a lot of planes go through. You'll see that really quick. There's also a lot of quick meteors that you'll see. They're so fast because they're only in one frame, but you can see the flashes of meteors. But I actually had one sequence in August, I think it was, of an object that stayed in the video for about, I think it was 7 seconds, 5 to 7 seconds. That translates to it being visible actually in real time to 40 minutes. And so I thought, I've never seen a satellite go that slow. So I actually made a little clip, repeating clip of that piece and threw it up there for people to look at. But I did some research on that and I found out something I didn't know, and that is that there's another type of orbit, especially was used by the Russians, that of their satellites, which will have highly elliptical orbits, and will come in fairly close to the Earth and go out for a far time. And the timing of what I picked up on this time lapse kind of matched that orbit. So I learned that there was another orbit that's being used, and actually sometimes used by the US as well for whatever purposes they have. So that was kind of interesting to capture something I had not seen. And in fact, the movie's so slow that if you were just looking at the sky, unless you were looking at that area for a length of time, you would not have seen it moving. And that's how slow it took. It went over about 60 degrees, about 50 or 60 degrees of the sky, I think, maybe a little less, in 40 minutes. So most of our attention span isn't quite that long. The other thing you can do with images you've taken, especially if you have a sky tracker, of course, I can take some rudimentary astrophotography with the sky tracker. I say rudimentary because I'm not getting serious with it yet, like the Bob Burgess of the world and the Bill Beers of the world who have high-end equipment to take a lot of sub-exposures and stack them for really beautiful pictures. But I did experiment a little bit with a 75 to 300 millimeter zoom lens this year on my sky tracker. Get it nicely polarized. And I took 1-minute shots with this camera, just 1-minute shots, a single shot in this particular case. With it set at 205 millimeter, 1 minute tracking. Okay, here's M31 in Andromeda Galaxy. It's a great shot. And this is, of course, at ISO 6400. Now, this image is processed. So the raw images was kind of like what you had seen in the wide angle stuff I did before. So I've done processing. I had to darken up the sky, bring out some detail, etc. The other thing you can do when you collect so many images is you can stack them to get rid of some of the noise floor that an ISO 6400 will generate on images. And you can do things like this. This is the core of the Milky Way, 17 images stacked. These were actually not even raw files, these were JPEG files, because I took this in Arizona in 2014. But I decided this was my first run with the camera at the time, and I thought, oh, let me take some of these images and stack them and see what happens. When I do image stacking, I use Deep Sky Stacker, which is available to anybody. And then I throw the final TIFF file that's generated by Deep Sky Stacker into Photoshop. And then I can mess around with the curves and color saturation and get it dark or whatever I want to do with it. So this is an example of the Milky Way from Arizona at 7,000 feet. The other thing you can do is sometimes you've got cool parts of the sky that just render themselves really nicely with a single frame unit. This is a single frame at 80 millimeter lens on a sky tracker. And I was amazed at how much is sitting there around the North American Nebula, just with this simple camera on a tripod. This was the North America Nebula with 140 millimeter lens and 9 cameras stacked. Lots of stuff there. Nice pretty pictures. I'm into pretty pictures right over. At this phase, I'm kind of into pretty pictures. But it's very cool that you can pick up in such a short period of time with these cameras. I might want to back up a little bit here. The reason I got this camera is I haven't had an SLR since the 70s. My astrophotography back in the 70s and 80s was an OM1 on slide film. And I kind of put off getting a new camera for a long time. I did get a used ST5 CCD camera in the 90s, and I used it a little bit to do some work on the 12-inch in the backyard. And I wasn't satisfied with it, and it seemed kind of a pain. So I stopped doing that, went back to general observing for a decade. But like I said, in 2014, I picked up this Canon, and I've been having a ball with it. The other thing you pick up is meteors. I actually ran this camera all night in August last year up at Boon Hill, and I collected, maybe 800 images. I don't remember how many that night, but I went through all of them. I did go through all of them. And I found about 20 to 25 images that had at least one meteor on it. And this one just happens to have 3 on it. And the other material you see here is actually foreground clouds. That's another interesting thing. When you run it all night, you don't know if you're going to have clouds or not, but you run it all night. And it actually made for an interesting photograph. But there's 2 quick meteors together. There's another little one right here. So, at this point, I want to play the video. Hopefully it won't last you years. I have no idea whether the volume's correct at this point. But this is the culmination of work from this last year. I took some of the segments I took, not all of them, and I generated this some things that were going to occur in the video. I wondered how many people noticed some of them. What did you notice?
Say that again?
Satellites?
Satellites, yes.
A slow moving one, you showed that.
So what's that?
The slow moving satellites.
Yes, yes.
I thought I saw earlier than that one, I thought I saw another one, maybe.
There was another one in Sagittarius when it was moving. It looked like it was moving in the background sky. That one was a fixed platform. What you were seeing is the geosynchronous satellite moving, not moving.
Okay.
So the geosynchronous satellite, the Sagittarius is moving across. It wasn't actually moving.
There's one that looked almost triangular, but it was too slow to be a plane or anything.
What's that?
That
There was
the
something
slow-
that looked triangular, but it wasn't, it was too slow to be a plane or anything, so,
You mean on the one where it lasts about 5-6 seconds?
yeah.
That was, the actual object, if you look at each frame, is pinpoint.
Okay,
But because I'm running at 30 frames per second,
I see it streaking.
it's streaking.
I see.
And it's got a fixed streak based on the frame rate that I'm generating. So it looks like it's just this continuous little sliver like this that moves across the sky.
Okay.
But you're looking at 30 frames per second when you're watching it. But if you look at each individual frame, it's a pinpoint. Yeah.
Before you started your movie, you said you showed the 3 meteors in the one picture.
Yeah.
I suggest that that double meteor is not a double meteor or 2. It's a tethered satellite. I saw one once with the naked eye. I couldn't understand what I was seeing until I looked it up.
That's possible, except it's only in that one frame.
Oh.
What were you shooting at?
15 seconds.
They're all 15 seconds.
Yeah. Also, there's 15
It's
seconds.
only in one frame. It's not a tethered satellite.
Yeah, that one shot. Those are 2 parallel meteors. They may be combined and split
All
up.
right, all right.
It's
Point take.
It's one frame.
Point taken.
What did you say? What did you say this slow moving object was in that?
It's a satellite.
Was it a satellite?
Yeah, but it's not in what you consider a normal orbit. You know,
Russian.
normal 90-minute orbit or a geosynchronous
So you said
orbit.
it was,
It's in between there. It goes out to about 10,000 miles and comes into about 500
I
miles.
got it.
North-south?
They're used for television transmission in Russia.
Yes. Joe?
Doug, how do you control your exposure when you go from dusk to daytime?
Okay. As you notice, some of the video, couple of videos, it would get brighter. That's obviously because twilight's coming. What I think you're alluding to is something that there's a piece of software you put on a laptop that will take the input from the camera and it will measure the local brightness and determine what exposure to use in order to have a consistent fade to dark from twilight into full darkness.
Right.
And if you notice that all the videos I put here, that fade is not occurring. Okay? I don't have that software yet. However, that's this year's project. Oh, I'm not done playing with this. Any other questions at this point? Over here.
Yeah, your remote, it's powered by a CR2, those little batteries.
Oh, yeah.
How do those last throughout the night, or is it drawing power from the camera that's plugged in?
The CR, there are the 232 CR batteries. They will last 2 nights all day. But I don't want to chance it. Sometimes it's a night and a half. So I always put a fresh one in. If I'm going to go full 10-hour night or whatever nighttime is at that time of year, I'll put a fresh one in there so it'll go all night. Yeah, John.
Not a question, but an observation. You did get a couple of calendar images out of this project as well.
Yes, I did.
So
Thank you.
those of you who are interested in following Doug's footsteps, you don't just have to be a YouTube star, you can also be a WASP calendar star.
Yeah, and like I said, this video was 9,000 images. I have collected in 18 months, I think about 30,000 images. Which, if you were to do that, I wouldn't do that if I couldn't automate it. I found that the frustration level is higher than the reward. I probably give it a second thought and not do it. So I tried to automate this. Very simple, just a camera, a tripod. You can do a lot of cool stuff with it. Now, I'm going to kind of delve into Joe's question for a second. The next step for improving this, as you notice, it was pretty dark in some of the videos. I might have oversaturated the darkness on a lot of these. But in addition, the ISO 6400 is pretty noisy. I don't know if you noticed any of the videos where there's sparkling going on. Yes. Yeah, that's the noise. Some of the sparkling of the actual stars is just turbulence of the images. But there is some background noise going on there. In order to eliminate that, I have to drop to ISO 800 and get a faster lens or increase my exposure time in order to get rid of that noise. Because the other choice, which is a partial choice, is I did do in 2014 a light frame of the sky, and the camera will actually do a dark frame and apply it, which takes some of the noise off, but not all of it. This last year, I didn't do any of that. I wanted to see what I could get, maximize my capture time, because every time you take a dark frame, you have to match the same amount of time as the light frame. So if I take a 15-second light, I take a 15-second dark. So now I'm up to 30 seconds instead of 30 seconds plus 10 seconds for processing time. I get half as many images in that period of time. So I made a conscious effort this year just to collect the data. In 2016, the other thing I'm going to do is this sky tracker. I'm going to try some interesting things with using the sidereal rate as if the NCP, the North Celestial Pole, is at zenith. So it's going to go flat. So the camera will pan across the foreground while the sky is moving on it. And I want to just try that for grants. And that's what you call the poor man's version, and Joe's knows what I'm talking about, the poor man's version of these contraptions you can get that are double railed, have these elaborate platforms that you put your camera on that also move like this over time or towards the foreground or away from it. I haven't done any of that yet. So I'm not a pro yet. Okay, any other questions? Yeah.
I've done these when I've done my usually the auto dark. And is there any way you can get it like in a regular crash of the product where we take a dark and then apply it to all frames? Any way you could do that?
I'll have to look into that because that's the next step if I want to. I kind of consider myself in the beginning intermediate stages of this. Last year I was in the beginner stages and going to help us do it. Got a little better at it now. And so there's plenty of opportunities to improve.
It seems like you should be able to do that. I don't know how you could.
Well, technically yes, but you got the software to allow you to do that. That's the question. Yeah, yeah.
What actually changes in a digital camera when you change the ISO rate?
The amount of gain that's applied to the chip. Okay? You ramp up the amplifier so it becomes more sensitive. I wasn't going to go into the tech details, but that's what you do. Yeah.
Ever make use of any broadband light pollution filters?
No. I don't have to. I don't need to. Show off. Well, actually, one of the sequences was in my backyard. The Northern Cross one had a lot of cloud cover and a glow in the north. Well, Flint's 20 miles north of me, so. Yeah.
At night, I assume sometimes you're alone out there up north. You ever come across animals come across you while you're out there?
Yeah.
Like any
Deers, skunks, porcupine.
Bears, you said?
Bears too. No, I haven't had a bear come close to me yet, but I've heard them out in the woods. And coyotes we hear all the time. Deer, a lot of deer. They scare the hell out of me actually. They go through the pines just to the east of me, make a lot of noise. Yeah, John?
Any Bigfoot?
Yeah.
There's a, for your noise issue, there's a product, it's like, I want to say it's like $49. It's made by a company called Topaz Labs. It has a product called Noise Adjust that I've had a lot of luck with as far as really dark, low light situations. I don't know if that would...
It's a possibility. I mean, I know how to get rid of, I know how to take dark frames. I used to do it with my ST5 all the time, and how to do that process. It's just that when you're taking thousands of images, I'm not willing to take thousands of dark frames. Yeah,
Ryan, I was just telling you, Ryan made a cold box for regular DSLR. That would bring the temperature of the camera.
Yeah, that could help. Because the ISO 6400 with the gains pumped up, that chip's pretty warm. So there's a lot of thermal noise there. Dale, did you have a question?
Yeah, I'm not sure I understood the details, but at one point, it sounded like you were saying you went from full data set per frame to maybe half or quarter of the data.
Yeah.
Did you just throw away the rest of the data?
No, it becomes compressed.
Okay, so can you do that in such a way that it reduces the noise?
No, it's because in order to reduce the noise on every pixel that's noisy, you have to pattern match that image with the noise that's there. And that noise is all over the place. It's not static.
Right.
It varies depending on what the The other thing I did notice here is the noise got worse through the night if I cycled the exposure times too close to each other. You know, like 3 seconds. The images would get a little bit warmer and warmer overnight. So I went to 10 seconds, between 5 and 10 seconds, so it has, you know, that little bit of time to cool down before it fires again. Okay. Yes.
If we're doing these moderate telephoto images, like say if you wanted to get the Pleiades and the Hyades all in one nice frame filling image.
Yeah, I can do that. If you notice the M30, I actually have a Pleiades shot, which I didn't include in this, but I literally have more data than I can have time to go through. But yeah, I started using my other telephoto, as you saw with the North American and Andromeda, as kind of the next thing. Now, the one thing I will say about these lenses, they're your main run-of-the-mill lenses you get with cameras, right? So if you actually look closely around the edges, there's a little bit of distortion, a little color correction issue. You can actually introduce a little bit of color distortion in the processing as well. So there's a lot of mistakes you can make, or you can say, yeah, that's good enough. But there's always trade-offs. I haven't gotten what I would consider a very good lens for this camera. Yeah?
As I understand it, there are basically two types of noise. There's a fixed pattern noise, which is kind of a function of the CCD or your detector, and then there's the temporal.
The thermal noise.
The random temporal noise.
Yep.
Now, your dark frame would correct the fixed pattern, as I understand it, and you almost have to either average or cool your detector in order to reduce the temporal noise.
So one of the other things you can do though, which is what I did in some of those stills I showed that I stacked, that eliminates a lot of that noise because it's averaged out on the stack.
Yeah, that's right.
Random noise averages out. So the signal to noise ratio goes up, so your signal is stronger and your noise floor gets
further advanced, I think, is your improvement in signal noise.
Okay, any other questions?
Just two more.
Two more, Mike?
What's the hard drives? What's the hard drive space on your computer?
3 terabytes. I have a 6 terabyte NAS as well, which is a network storage. I have 6 terabytes of network storage as well. So that'll help storage. And then back here?
Do you activate the in-camera noise reduction?
Yes, I have. And as I mentioned earlier, if I do that, there's actually two parts on the camera for noise reduction. It will either take a dark frame. Well, primarily it takes a dark frame and then puts it on that image before you even get it. Which means I take a 15-second light frame, which is the object of interest, and then it takes a 15-second dark frame. Effectively, it does not open the shutter. And it pre-processes them together before it shows you the image. That means I take twice as much time to take that particular image.
Because the dark frame occurs in real time.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. In this case, now in astrophotography, you can take dark frames almost any time at the same exposure with the right temperature as what you took your lights and then apply post-processing later. But that's not what I'm doing here. Because I'm not taking, 20 subs on one object in one night. I'm taking thousands of images through the night and automating it. Okay, thank you very much.
YouTube channel.
Doug Bock.